Sophia's struggle. My mother-in-law's disdain is a constant burden. She looks down on me, frequently criticizing my every move. You can't do anything but cook, she scoffs, her voice dripping with contempt. She has a knack for making me feel inadequate, often barging into our bedroom to rifle through closets and drawers, hurling accusations. Why do you make such a mess? It's no surprise, really. After all, you only graduated middle school. Her disdain for my education, or lack thereof, seems endless. I try to keep my head down, knowing I can't argue back. Living with my mother-in-law since marrying has been nothing short of a nightmare. I'm Sophia. My parents own a small restaurant. My father is a skilled chef, dedicated to his craft, while my mother, who used to work in a café, now manages the front of the house with charm and efficiency. Despite its age and distance from the city center, our restaurant is beloved for its food and service, always bustling with customers. Growing up as an only child, I admired my parents deeply and dreamed of one day taking over the family business. I began helping out in the restaurant from a young age. After middle school, I had to take on more responsibilities as my father's health began to fail. Although I wasn't able to replicate his exact flavors, I followed his recipes closely, striving to maintain the restaurant's high standards. At first, I was unsure of my skills, but soon regular customers began complimenting me. Sophia's cooking is delicious. It tastes just like your dad's. Their encouragement motivated me to contribute more, hoping to ease my father's burden. However, being a high school student, balancing work and studies was challenging. One day, a teacher requested a meeting with my parents, expressing concern over my poor attendance and discussing my future. Despite my parents urging me to focus on my studies, I felt torn. This restaurant has been cherished by our family for years, and it's precious to me too. I love both the cooking and this place, I told them, deciding to leave school. My parents, though heartbroken, supported my decision. I completed the dropout process and began working full-time at the restaurant. Years have passed, and I'm now 30. I handle most of the restaurant's operations alone, from opening preparations to closing cleanup, as my father's health issues keep him frequently hospitalized and my mother by his side. One day, as I was working, a man entered the restaurant, despite the closed sign hanging at the entrance. "Something wrong? You look a bit flustered," he said. I cut my finger while prepping, I replied. "Hey, are you okay? Here, take this Band-Aid," he offered. "Thanks, that really helped," I said, accepting it gratefully. He introduced himself as Ted, my boyfriend, who is 2 years younger than me and immersed in family business. I hadn't had many encounters with men, but Ted, a kitchen equipment salesman who frequently visited our restaurant, and I connected and eventually started dating. Ted, caring and skilled in his job, seemed too good to be true at first. I wondered why someone like him would be interested in me, but as time passed, those doubts faded. Now we're about to celebrate our 3rd anniversary together. Ted proposed on our anniversary, suggesting, "Let's get married." There was no reason to decline, so I joyfully accepted his proposal. Although I was concerned about leaving the restaurant, my parents reassured me. "Don't worry about it. We want you to be happy," they said, welcoming the idea of our marriage. Despite my happiness, I felt a twinge of guilt. As our anniversary approached, Ted and his mother came to visit our restaurant for the first time, marking the meeting of our families. Knowing Ted's father had passed away early, I had informed my parents in advance. "I'm so happy we finally met," Ted's mother said with a smile. "My son talks about you all the time." "No, it's our daughter who's been singing your praises," my parents replied, smiling back. "We're grateful to have Ted in our lives. Our daughter's only skill is cooking, but we hope you'll take good care of her." "Let's skip the formalities and enjoy the dinner," Ted suggested, and I began serving the dishes I had prepared. "Everything is wonderful," they exclaimed. "Ted is lucky to have a wife who cooks so well." "Everything is delicious." Ted and his mother enjoyed the meal and conversed happily with my parents. Seeing everyone pleased with the meal I had prepared filled me with immense joy. The meeting between our families concluded on a high note. Ted and I got married soon after. Although we didn't have a formal wedding ceremony due to Ted's busy schedule, moving into a rented house together made me truly feel married. A few months into our marriage, Ted brought up an unexpected proposal. "I'm worried about my mother living alone," he said. I was surprised, but we have a spacious house. Ted continued, I've been thinking of inviting her to live with us starting next week. Given her age, it would be safer for her to be with us in case of emergencies. It was an unexpected suggestion, and we hadn't discussed it beforehand. I was taken aback by Ted's suggestion, but I couldn't find a valid reason to object. In the end, I could only nod in agreement. When we were house hunting, Ted was adamant about getting a detached house, or as I had preferred, a flat or condo. However, I was swayed by his argument that a larger home would be better. I wondered if he had planned this from the start, but I tried not to dwell on it too much. Our newlywed life passed quickly, and soon, living with my mother-in-law became our reality. Ted was away during the weekdays for work and was mostly out on weekends. Although the arrangement was meant to support his mother, I rarely saw him do anything for her. Another issue soon became apparent. My mother-in-law was a completely different person from when we first met. Initially, she had enjoyed my cooking, but now she refused to touch it. "Eating this kind of food will make me sick. Are you feeding my son this?" she would ask. I apologized, saying that perhaps the seasoning was too strong. "Your family's cooking might have been like this, but mine is much more refined and lightly seasoned. It's a shame my son has to eat this every day." Ted still claimed he liked my cooking, but my mother-in-law remained constantly dissatisfied. I decided to try cooking healthier meals that would be more suitable for the elderly, using cookbooks and online resources. Yet she criticized the food as tasteless and unappealing, saying it wasn't nutritious enough and seemed unhealthy. Her complaints extended beyond the food. She would use excuses like back pain or leg pain to avoid helping with household chores. To avoid conflict, I took on the chores myself, only to be met with sarcastic remarks like, "You call this clean? It looks like a trash bin. Well, you did drop out of middle school, so I suppose it's to be expected." After enduring this situation for 3 months, I reached my breaking point. When I tried to talk to Ted about his mother, he brushed me off, saying he was too tired from work. His company had recently gone through major layoffs, which had increased his workload and required him to work late hours. Despite this, I was determined to address the issue with my mother-in-law before Ted went to work. I asked Ted if we could talk outside after work tonight, since my mother-in-law was at home and I knew it wouldn't be possible to have a calm discussion there. Ted complained about being swamped with work, but I earnestly begged him, saying, "Please, I'm begging you." Moved by my plea, he finally agreed. "I think a short meeting should be okay, but really just a little bit," he emphasized. We agreed to meet at a café near his office at 8 p.m. to minimize the time I have to spend with my mother-in-law. I prepared dinner in advance and left the house a bit early without informing her, knowing that any encounter would likely lead to more of her usual sharp remarks. Arriving early at the café, I decided to take a stroll around the town. Not usually interested in anything beyond cooking, I found the walk surprisingly refreshing. While browsing the shopping mall, I considered picking up something for Ted when I was struck by a sudden realization. My eyes widened in disbelief as I saw Ted walking with another woman. I rubbed my eyes repeatedly, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, but there was no mistaking it. It was definitely Ted. I watched them leave a store and, driven by a mix of shock and curiosity, found myself following them. They secluded themselves in a quiet area and embraced each other in a way that clearly indicated more than just friendship. The sight overwhelmed me, and I broke down in tears, unable to control my emotions. Unable to bear it any longer, I fled the scene and messaged Ted, saying that something urgent had come up and I couldn't meet him that night. Questions swirled in my mind. Since when? Who is she? The image of their intimate moment made me feel nauseous. Somehow, I managed to return home, where my mother-in-law was waiting for me. "Sophia, where have you been? It's not normal to leave without saying a word. If you have any common sense, you usually let us know before going out," she scolded. I didn't have the energy to argue. I silently went to the kitchen, staring at the dinner I had prepared, my mind still reeling from the day's events. The meal I had prepared for my mother-in-law barely touched, and seeing it made me regret making it and brought me to tears once again. That night, I stayed locked in my room. When Ted came home, I couldn't bring myself to see him and chose to ignore him instead. "Sophia, are you awake?" Ted knocked on the door several times. Normally, I would have prepared a snack for him, but there was none tonight. His voice was tinged with frustration. "What's going on?" I adjusted my work schedule and was waiting. It's problematic to cancel like this. How could he complain about waiting when he had been enjoying time with another woman? My absence should have been a minor issue for him. It felt as if he thought I was oblivious to everything. Ted began to complain to his mother, who had come to the door. "What's happening, Ted? It's late and noisy," she said. "Mom, Sophia, and I had plans for dinner, but she suddenly canceled and won't even talk to me now," Ted lamented, casting himself as the victim. My mother-in-law joined in with her usual sarcastic remarks. "Really, Sophia? You left without a word, can't manage the household properly, neglect your in-laws, and are so irresponsible. I was looking forward to our dinner plans and even adjusted my work schedule for it. To think she would cancel on such an important commitment with her husband. Was she out playing? I shudder to think what would happen if you had children." As my mother-in-law unjustly criticized me, the thought of exposing Ted's affair flashed through my mind. But what Ted said next was even more shocking than his mother's taunts. "There's no need to worry about that. Sophia can't have children, and she's already 30. I've given up on the idea of having kids with her," Ted said matter-of-factly. I had kept my infertility a secret, confiding only in Ted before we married. I didn't want to become his wife without him knowing, out of fear of hurting him. I had asked him not to tell anyone, and he had promised to keep it confidential. To have it exposed so callously was beyond belief. "Oh, so Sophia can't have children. Totally useless, isn't she?" my mother-in-law sneered, further deepening the wound. I had chosen the wrong person. We'd been deceived all along. After all, she only clung to the marriage because she didn't want to lose it, realizing she might not have another chance. Overwhelmed by the betrayal, I put on my headphones, cranked up the volume, and tried to drown out the world with music. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, Ted's infidelity replayed in my mind. I stopped the music, and the echoes of earlier conversations felt like they were tearing my heart apart with sadness and pain. Weeks later, Ted's relatives were coming to our house for a marriage celebration. I hadn't wanted any celebration, but my mother-in-law had taken it upon herself to organize one. She told the relatives that I was a restaurant chef and handed me a list of dishes to prepare. Although the list was extensive, cooking was my greatest joy. I decided to pour my heart into it, immersing myself in the process. It provided relief from daily stress and evoked fond memories of cooking with my parents. On the day of the celebration, around 10 relatives gathered at our modest living room, which, though small, managed to accommodate everyone. "Wow, the food looks delicious. You prepared all this." The relatives marveled at the dishes. Their enjoyment and compliments brought tears of joy to my eyes. "I'm so glad you enjoy my cooking," I said, bowing slightly. "Thank you." Their responses were heartwarming. "Of course it's delicious. We should be thanking you. Please make it again." Just then, my mother-in-law, seemingly dissatisfied with the praise I was receiving, interjected. "It's not that great. The dishes are too rich and greasy for everyday use. They give me heartburn and might raise my blood pressure." Is she trying to kill me? Her comment soured the atmosphere immediately. Ted, engrossed in his phone, remained oblivious to the shift in mood. My mother-in-law continued, "I've heard her family's restaurant is popular, but it's just in a small country place. The customers are low quality and the food is coarse. Besides, she didn't even finish high school, can't hold down a decent job, and can't have kids. What a dud for a daughter-in-law." The relatives' looks turned cold. A woman close to my age whispered to another, their whispers only adding to the sting of my mother-in-law's harsh words. "I don't know how you put up with her," I murmured with a forced smile. "But this is the last time." With that, I stood up and made a bold announcement. "Everyone, please take a look at this," I said, holding up my smartphone. The screen displayed a photo of Ted in an embrace with another woman. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the image. "What are you doing?" Ted shouted, rushing towards me. "What am I doing? I'm just showing the truth," I replied loudly, facing his anger head-on. "What on earth is this about?" Ted's mother asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know. This is a lie. I would never do such a thing," Ted stammered, trying to maintain his composure. His mother looked between us, clearly shocked but still trying to support his claims. I took a deep breath, ready to lay everything bare. "Ted has been having an affair. I hired a detective agency to gather evidence, and these photos are authentic." "A detective agency?" Ted exclaimed, his voice rising in disbelief. "How could you?" "I've also recorded all the harassment I've endured from you," I continued, cutting him off. "I will be claiming compensation for my mental distress, and I will also be pursuing damages from you, Rose." Ted and his mother started to retort, their voices filled with defensiveness. Hiring a detective is such a cowardly move. You should be grateful you even married Ted. His mother snapped. And it's all your fault, making Ted marry you and causing us discomfort, Ted added, trying to shift the blame. Their words felt hollow. The evidence was irrefutable. The affair and the harassment were undeniable. Is it a lie, Ted? Even if you were harassed, it doesn't change the fact of the affair, I said with a calm smile. One of the relatives who had earlier whispered encouragement spoke up. Sophie, you did well. Thank you, I replied, feeling a surge of relief and clarity for the first time in a long while. The divorce was finalized successfully. In the aftermath, Ted's affair became known at his company, leading to his transfer from the head office to a different branch. It seemed he and his mother moved to a new place, likely closer to his new job. As for me, after receiving the alimony from Ted and his mother, I felt a new sense of freedom and closure. I decided to return to my parents' house for a while. My parents were initially taken aback by my divorce but welcomed me with open arms, saying nothing about the situation. As I considered whether to help out at the family restaurant or pursue further studies in cooking, my father gave me some invaluable advice. Why don't you go abroad? It might be challenging, but the experiences you'll gain will be worth it. This restaurant will be here waiting for you when you return. It was clear that my parents understood my true desires. Taking my father's advice to heart, I used the alimony to fund my journey abroad. I immersed myself in the world of cooking, training under renowned chefs and working at a prestigious 3-star restaurant. During this time, I met a man from France. Despite a brief courtship, our shared passion for cooking forged a strong bond between us, and we eventually married. Together, we became partners who could inspire and elevate each other's skills. After 5 years abroad, we returned to New York as promised. My parents had kept the restaurant thriving in my absence. Upon our return, my husband began showcasing his culinary skills there. The restaurant's unique flavors and stunning presentations drew even more attention, making it more vibrant and popular than ever before. Having now taken over the restaurant from my parents, my husband and I lead a fulfilling life together, dedicating ourselves to our craft. One day, I received a letter from my former mother-in-law. Her words were filled with apology and reflection. She wrote, I also received harsh criticisms from my own mother-in-law, particularly about my cooking and housekeeping. I admit that I was jealous of your culinary skills and took it out on you. Now, as I cook for myself, I strive to recreate your flavors, though I doubt I'll ever match them. I hope, though it may seem unlikely, that you might taste my cooking someday. I am truly sorry. Her heartfelt letter touched me deeply, and I felt a subtle shift in my feelings toward her. I hope that one day we can share a meal together with smiles and understanding. Until then, I am committed to continuing my journey of improving